We have two guests today, and the first one is Taylor Hawes. I've got a leg up on both these guys because their boss, Mike Brown, was chairman of the NASDAQ when I was recruited to go to NASDAQ, and he referred to them frequently in our many conversations over the 7 years we were there together in the NASDAQ environment. Taylor is a very interesting guy. He's the general manager of finance systems and operations at Microsoft. That means he makes the place work. Think of it as the guy who makes all of the financial stuff work. And to give you an example of the kinds of assignments that he gets, right now he's integrating the Nokia acquisition. And before that, I guess you did Skype. And just a few small efforts that have to go right. When I first heard about him, Mike Brown was bragging about having standardized accounting across Microsoft worldwide, getting a standard chart of accounts, and both of our speakers, John Connors and Taylor Hawes, were engaged in making that actually happen. And I remember how happy Mike Brown was when they produced their first sort of consolidated, standardized set of reports out of a multi-year long effort to bring standardization to the accounting system. Microsoft, I'm going to just digress for just a second here, because these guys have done so much more, and Microsoft generally has done so much more than a standalone company would typically be thought of as doing. The role of standards in computing are profoundly important, more understood than we understand standards in finance. And Microsoft has actively participated in the standards organizations all up and down the stack of IT disciplines. So I'm delighted to have you here, Taylor, and come on up here and enlighten us a little bit.
I'd also like to take a moment and introduce Jeff Scott. So Jeff Scott works at Microsoft, and he's our group program manager that runs our BI group. And he's working on all the really fun and cool stuff, such as natural language query on our databases, being able to use Cortana to bring back results and maybe tell a bad joke now and then. But Jeff is leading a lot of these kinds of initiatives. I've been privileged to be involved in XBRL a long time. John Connors was our visionary CFO that initiated the NASDAQ demo. And from that point forward, Microsoft was involved in the consortium. We're involved in XBRL US. We're actually one of the first SEC filers tagged in XBRL. And if you go to our investor relations website, you'll see that XBRL plays a prominent role in that website, and a lot of the data underlying that website is all tagged in XBRL and available. Today, I actually have the privilege of talking about XBRL as it relates to internal use. And it's kind of an interesting presentation because you hear an awful lot about big data. And, people are talking about big data this and big data that, and in fact, there's going to be 5.7, not kilobytes, but petabytes or some ungodly amount of data saved online this year that is the cumulative amount of data for the last 5 years. And so this collection and capture of information, bits of information from all different sources is becoming more and more pervasive. So as we think about reporting and we think about how to perform our analytics, we have to contemplate both structured data, which XBRL is highly structured, and unstructured data, and bring that together through really powerful tools to perform, analytics and presentations of views of how to aggregate and summarize all this information. So that's what I'm going to talk about today. And so Microsoft has a management reporting system, so we use SAP. We have a standardized global chart of accounts. Nokia will soon have a standardized global chart of accounts. But It's highly structured. Our reporting database that we extract is much like a Hyperion Financial Management or BPC out of SAP, and it enables us to organize our data in the way that we want to present it. We close our books globally on a management basis and on a statutory basis concurrently. And in fact, the way that we set up our chart of accounts enables us to both report management and statutory at the same time. So, and we'll show a little bit of that in how we go about doing that. So we have this database. It's called Mercury. It's highly structured. And the hierarchy that we report on is a 7-level hierarchy. And again, it has multiple dimensions to it. It has the legal dimension, as well as the management, sales location, as well as the organizational structure and function. So for us to introduce XBRL into that structure is actually highly complex. And so as we worked on Jeff and I worked on putting this together and kind of contemplating this, what we did is we essentially thought about how do we extend and evolve our infrastructure around XBRL. And that's essentially what we're doing, is we have this highly structured environment, but the ability to tag and use XBRL to extend and enhance that environment, we feel that's really powerful, because it allows us to add new dimensions, and I think we're going to show you a little bit of that. And adding those dimensions and adding that structure and tagging that data, it also allows us to make it self-reconciling. And for those of you that are financial reporting folks, self-reconciling is a good thing. And it allows us to be able to present alternative views of data, but still get back to the standard published views. And that's incredibly, incredibly important. We also wanted to be able to integrate with multiple reporting hierarchies. So for example, in our U.S. field sales, we want to look at sales and revenue and organization and cost by district, but that doesn't necessarily exist in our standard roll-ups and our standard hierarchies. So we can actually use XBRL to tag that data at a sub-level and report on that data, but again, reconcile back to the standard infrastructure. And then the thing that I think is most powerful is when you have this enterprise corporate reporting environment, at least at Microsoft, to drive a change in that environment, we have to make sure that we test that change, we're very deliberate about it, and that we don't break anything that already exists. So being able to bring in XBRL and extend that hierarchy very rapidly and be able to produce reports or produce alternative views in the matter of days or hours is really a powerful addition to our infrastructure and the way that we think about it. So it allows us to perform these comparatives very quickly versus our competitors. We'll show you how we've imported through this concept of Power Query on the Edgar site, and we can just download all of our competitor data, and we can show you how we can bring that all together. Okay. So as Al talked about, we're in the process of acquiring Nokia. And about a year ago, we announced the acquisition, and we had to go through regulatory approval in 27 countries. And because of that, the quiet period became quite extended. There's a number of different challenges that we had to overcome, but we finally closed on the transaction in mid-April of this year. But between the time that we acquired the company and the time that we closed on the company, interesting things happen in an acquisition, right? Nokia is not going to invest a lot of money in their business, because they want to preserve their cash, if you will, as they spin out the company. Microsoft can't control the business because we don't own it yet, and we're all kind of in this holding pattern. So in that interim period, what was really important is for us to begin to understand what is the implications and impact of this acquisition. And so that's what we're going to show you today, is how we use XBRL to understand the pro forma of the combined Microsoft-Nokia entity, and how we use that to really understand, one, how we look internally, how we look geographically, and then how we look competitively. And we'll kind of walk you through each step of that. So with that, one of the things that we wanted to make sure that we covered, Jeff and I covered, is not just showing you the pie as it comes out of the oven, because Microsoft, we love to do demos, and we can make anything look pretty snazzy just standing up here presenting it to you. But we also wanted to walk through the process that we went through. So we're actually going to go through a set of steps that we explain, each step of the process and kind of how we how we began to bring all of this together in a pretty straightforward way. So we're going to go through that process, and then we're actually going to go to a live demo. Jeff's connected online via Wi-Fi in the hotel, and we've been quite nervous that we have a good connection on that, but hopefully we'll get that to run, and we're actually going to show you the actual live data. Sound good? All right, so Jeff, let's go to one more slide.
Yeah, I think we want to hold it on this slide
Yeah.
here because we want to talk a little bit about
there you go.
the overall process here. So basically what we're trying to do here is we're trying to bring data from its sources. And since Nokia is a Finnish company that does not file an XBRL, we hunted around and found on the SEC Gov archive site the Edgar filings for that. And it was pretty easy for us to go out and pull that data in using Excel. And the way we did it is there's an add-on in Excel called Power Query, and we basically just pasted the URL in there, and we were able to bring the data in. And what Power Query did, which is very powerful, is it took the data and it parsed the HTML and brought it into a number of tables. And from those tables, we could go through and kind of explore and look at the different tables and see a somewhat structured version of the data that was previously unstructured. And so that's kind of really what's happening with the Nokia side. Now on the Microsoft and some of our peer competitors, that was a little bit easier because we were able to go directly to the XBRL site and use tools to just bring it straight into our Excel, and that's a little more straightforward. And really, so what I'm going to show you here is we're going to talk about how that process worked. I'm going to kind of open up the hood a bit and show you the steps that we went through to do that. And then ultimately what we do is we try to create a model, and we're doing this fairly rapid. We're doing this without IT. We're doing it with an analyst could do this with a helper that understands some of our Power BI stack, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. But really the idea is to be able to go out and say, okay, how can we bring this data together? Probably the most interesting thing about this is how can we leverage XBRL, and how can XBRL help us achieve this? And so what we looked at as we were exploring through the Nokia tables was that Nokia currently files at a geo level, and that's something that Microsoft does not do. And so we thought, well, that would be interesting to go to XBRL and use our tag extension capability of XBRL and match the geo areas the same as Nokia, and then populate that data with some of our internal system data. And so by doing that, we're able to bring all of the data together and compare the Nokia to Microsoft pro forma before acquisition, and then also we could bring all the data together and show it post-acquisition. Yeah. And along the path, bring the peer data in as well.
And sorry to interrupt you, Jeff, but what's interesting about that is the way that Nokia rolled up their countries and the way that Microsoft rolls up their countries are very, very different, right? And so what we wanted to be able to do is look at the comparative of how Microsoft would look. And so we had to go below our SEC filing and tag the data along the roll-up for Nokia in order to make that happen. So very, very cool.
And then really the last part of this, which is kind of the far left side, is once you get that data brought all together into a model, then you've got a whole variety of visualization, analysis tools where you can drill down and kind of create reports, create them and publish them out to the cloud, so it's easy to get to the information from any device, pretty much anywhere where you have a Wi-Fi connection. So we'll kind of walk through that. I'll show you the steps of acquiring the data, and then we'll jump over to the live demo and hope that it's working. It appears to be right now. And it's really just connected to Wi-Fi, and then we can kind of go into that and talk a little bit about the navigation, the reports we've created, and some of the insights we could get from looking at that information. Okay. So let's jump over to this machine.
And while Jeff's getting started, one of the things that we're talking about is this whole Power BI suite. And as he navigates through his presentation, what you'll see is he's using different components of that suite. And again, that all lights up in our common, our Office 365 infrastructure for business.
Okay, so this first slide, I mean, this is fairly simple. This is what I was referring to earlier, where we basically took the URL for Nokia's filing in the Edgar, the SEC Gov Edgar URL site, and went in there, plugged it into Power Query. And Power Query basically is just going to go out and get this data. Power Query is set up to go to many, many different sources. A URL is one of them. So through here, we're just basically putting the URL in and pulling that data into Excel. And then the next step, and this was really pretty quick to do this. So this is where we're going to go in and create a query. And really what we're doing here is we're shaping the data. We're trying to organize the data a little bit. So we're going to remove some columns, remove some rows, elevate rows to create some columns. So we have just basically, and what I was drilling in here on was basically, let's take a look at the geo regions, because that's what we're interested in here. So about 4 steps to get to this, where we've got these geo regions, and this is from the time we've actually put the URL in until we've actually been able to look at this table. And then what we do is execute that query, and there's our result set, and it's basically showing us some information about these geos. And the thing I'm most interested in right here is, okay, these are the geos that I want to go into XBRL now and extend the tags to match these, and then populate that with one of our internal Microsoft systems. So through Power Query, we're able to do this really quick. And so this slide here is really just kind of depicting or showing a little bit of how we would go into XBRL and extend those tags. And so we've added our geos here.
Yeah. So this is where we took the Microsoft data, of course, and in not having the roll-up or the geo presentation, we extended the XBRL taxonomy based upon the same structure that we're using for the SEC filing, pointing it internally, enabling us to do the roll-up by country along these dimensions. And then now what you'll see is a result set that will enable us to look at Microsoft versus Nokia in a pro forma and be able to also look at it, by the supporting countries within that structure.
So once we've extended the tags in XBRL, then again, going back to Power Query, we're just going to extract that data and bring it into Excel. Pretty straightforward. And while we're doing this, we thought, well, let's go ahead and pull some of our peer data from other companies that are also in XBRL as well. So we did that, and basically what we're doing here is the same thing we did before with the Nokia data. It's bringing it into a Power Query form where we can curate the data a bit, we can organize it, and structure it the way we want it to look. And then from this, what happens in the Power BI stack is we move from the Power Query element or the Power Query functionality into what's called Power Pivot. And Power Pivot's very powerful because what it does there is creates a data model. And again, it's doing this all behind the scenes. And in the end state here, after about 5 or 6 clicks, we actually have a published model here that we can work with. This resides in the Excel stack, and we can publish this out to the cloud and build our visualizations and our analysis tools on top of this. And this one...
Oh, no, go ahead. So I was going to say that, many of us, as we perform analysis, right? So, our CFO comes to our office and says, I want you to help me understand something, and you perform that analysis. You often find issues with data, as Jeff talks about curating or forming that data, essentially we're making the adjustments and corrections, if you will, to get the data to line up and map in the exact way that we want to. So what these tools allow you to do is do that in a structured way and in a very auditable way that can allow you to go back and understand how you came and arrived at the conclusion that you came to. So, just trying to be honest about, the steps that we actually go through as we perform these analyses. But in the very end, what's very cool that Jeff's talking about is that, the visual of the data model now is presented and how you brought it all together, and then how you're joining and connecting that data between what's structured and then what's unstructured. And I think it's a very nice way of showing it, right?
One of the cool things we wanted to do here is basically Power Pivot will create the model for you, but we want to augment it a bit because we're starting to imagine what some of the visual features we might want to use. And one of those was a geography feature that shows a world map with basically some latitude and longitude points to help us look at that map, and I'll show you that here in just a second. So what we're doing there is we're adding a table, connecting it, and providing the values for the areas on the map that we want to look at. So what we're going to do now is we're going to move from this is basically PowerPoint presentation, we're going to go to a live demo. Take me just a second to switch over here.
Believe it or not, this is the one thing that we worried about most, is switching between the presentation and the live demo.
And we have an optimal resolution notification.
Okay. Okay, so what you see here is you're actually seeing a pie chart, and the pie chart consists of the pro forma of the combined Microsoft Nokia sales in each of these geographies. Jeff pointed out that we introduced latitude and longitude by country location, and that allowed the pie chart to actually be present in the correct location on the global map. And of course, there's many maps that you can use, and maybe you can kind of hover across some of that and show some of the capabilities that it has.
Yeah, I think one thing to keep in mind here is, again, we're just kind of going back to we acquired this data, the unstructured, the structured data, we brought it together, we augmented the model a bit, and then we executed the queries to bring the data in. So at this point, what we've basically done is said, okay, well, we've got the model the way we want it. Let's go out and quickly create some visual features. And this is a geo feature, a mapping feature that comes with Power Pivot, or with Power View, I'm sorry. And so we basically just kind of developed this very, very rapidly. And then the key on this demo is that we published all of this to the cloud. So this is not tied to, this is you can get to this from any device, and it navigates the same way. So that's kind of a cool feature. So I'm just going to kind of show you a few of the things we can do here. You can move the map around a little bit. You can hover over some of these pies, and it will call out some of the sum values for these areas. So if we're in Australia or the APAC area here, you can see that the sum value of the division revenue is that amount, and then for the red area it's Nokia, and so it's similar on different areas here. One of the things that's interesting here is that if we wanted to drill into this area, we can double click on that and zoom right in, and it will break that area out into some sub-geographies. And I think you had a name for what these are.
Oh, sales locations.
These are our sales locations. Yeah. Okay, he knows the business side better. So anyway, so this is just kind of an example of drilling down, drilling back up, moving around a bit here so you can kind of explore as you wish. And you can also do some other things, like if you want to isolate on specific regions, you could go to Australia here or to China and kind of move around there as well.
What if I just want to know the Nokia sales for this hardware division? How would you find that out, Jeff? Would you just click on the?
Yeah, we could just click on. We could say, well, let's isolate Nokia here. So that would be the way to do that.
Yeah, and it's pretty cool. If you look at the dynamic chart on the right, of course, it's updating real time with the underlying data that is being clicked on. So if you clicked on Microsoft, you can see that chart shift to the Microsoft sales. So again, this is connected to your underlying tag data that's in the Power Pivot view.
Good. So I think what we want to do now is we're going to move. We got two more parts of the demo. We're going to move to another tab here. This is another visual perspective on the model that we've built. And this one's interesting because we're looking at this on a time scale, and we're basically comparing Microsoft and Nokia here. I'm going to let you speak to this.
Yeah.
You got it.
So it's kind of interesting. I won't get into the reasons for the acquisition, but you can kind of see what our Nokia phone sales were doing over the last 5 years, and the reason why maybe perhaps Microsoft acquired them in the sales trends. The light blue, of course, is Microsoft, and the red is Nokia, and you can see the relative trends between the two companies. The thing that I'm interested in is the gross margin percentage year over year and what that trend looks like. And you can see that between 2012 and 2013 that the gross margin percentage trended up for Nokia. And that might be indicative of some factory closures or some adjustments that Nokia made into their overhead and their COGS to actually improve their gross margin percentage. So clearly we know that there's some opportunity for improvement in their cost structure in their manufacturing environment. But what becomes more interesting is as we think about it from a pro forma point of view, and we move to the next slide, now we look at Microsoft and the gross margin percentage as it compares to our competitors. So you can see in the chart, we've imported off of Edgar all of our competitors that have manufacturing. So think of tech competitors in manufacturing. So it'd be Microsoft, Google when they owned Moto, HP, Dell, and so on, Apple. And you can see that our gross margin or percentage for Microsoft for our 2013 fiscal year was 74%. And being predominantly a software company, that's actually quite good and one of the top in the industry. If you look at Nokia, even with the uptick in their gross margin percentage at 42%, it's quite a different business than the business that we have today. So our CFO is very concerned about what does the combined company look like and what is the implications of the combined company on our gross margin and profitability. And so you can see the bright blue, and you can see that our gross margin on top line has deteriorated 6%, even with the uptick in their performance over that time. So we know that we have some work to do. 6% of sales is quite a lot of money when you think about sales of about $80 billion. You can do the math. So that says that we have some work to do as a company to maintain our gross margin profitability. However, when you look at the left chart on the bottom and you look at Microsoft compared to its competitors, you can say, well, we're still doing pretty well compared to Google and others. However, if we had a deterioration back to the lower gross margin percentage that Nokia had a run rate on, of course, that would certainly have a severe impact in how we stack up against that peer group. So then you kind of look at gross margin, so we have an understanding of what the impact is and what the variability of that impact is on the combined company. Now what we want to do is look at operating income. How profitable would Microsoft be in the pro forma acquired company versus our competitors? And if you look at the light green, that's Apple. And if you look at the differential percentage between Apple in their gross margin, I can't read that. Let's see. I think it's 38%. And you look at the bottom percentage, and that's 29%. What that tells you is that Apple is an incredibly disciplined company. There's only a 9% differential between gross margin and operating income. So, they're lean, they're mean, and they're very, very efficient. When you look at some of the other companies, and I won't actually be very explicit about it, but there are other companies that have a fairly high operating income, but when you look at what their cost structures are, may be much, much less efficient. So, if you think about this, in a very short amount of time, we can look at a pro forma of Microsoft and Nokia, both geographically, we can look at it at a gross margin percentage level, we can look at it on a competitive level, and essentially, we've extended our current infrastructure to be able to perform this analysis and make it dynamic and interactive for our users. So we think it's very, very powerful. So to kind of net it out, the power of having structured data, but being able to extend that structure through the use of XBRL internally, very, very powerful capability. And it's one that we're pretty excited about. Being able to bring structured and unstructured data together and be able to present that through Power BI and be able to have an interactive, dynamic analysis, kind of real time, we think really, really, adds fuel to the fire to make it even more compelling that you could extend that and use that internally. And the fact that we can actually put that into a PowerPoint deck for our mid-year review, into a scorecard, a dynamic scorecard that allows our executives to interact with that scorecard in an iterative sort of way, or even deliver that on a phone and make that an app on a phone and interact through the cloud on the phone with that data, just makes it really, really compelling. I don't know, Jeff, if you had some other thoughts.
I think the thing that's amazing about this compared to previous years is that this is very easy to do. I mean, it did not require IT. There was no development cycle in this. Changes can be made to this model in real time, and it's just a matter of refreshing it on the cloud to see what changes were made. We'd actually made a mistake in here this morning. It was funny because we had I think we had a different metric in here, and we needed to change just the text, and it was very easy to do. We called up somebody and said, "Hey, go in there and change the text," and I refreshed it, and it was what we wanted. So very, very quick and kind of fun too. So.
Well, great. Well, thank you very much for giving us an opportunity to present this to you. I'll hand it back down. You have a question? Yeah, let's see. Okay, so the question is, while building up the Microsoft internal reporting, did you use XBRL GL in any way? And do you think XBRL GL could be useful in mapping data to the instance of ERR, general ledger level? Well, I think I can answer these both with a very simple question. A lot of our reporting infrastructure has already been developed and built, as it is today. And so, if we want to leverage the power of XBRL, the key is how do we do so in a way that's complementary to the infrastructure that we had. If we were starting from scratch, essentially what I would do is actually put XBRL on the code block and make that extensible, which would allow us to, to extend the taxonomy right there and be able to just extract that data straight out of the GL, and then be able to have multiple roll-ups and hierarchies. For internal reporting purposes, typically there are multiple views of that data and multiple ways that people want to see that. So I think the power of the structure of XBRL and the ability to extend it is really kind of how we've taken advantage of it. Using XBRL GL is certainly a viable option. And the Nokia team that's actually mapping their chart of accounts into ours is actually contemplating using some of that capability to map that data over. But we're not using XBRL GL, and we didn't contemplate it back then. That was in 1997 that we actually implemented it, so just a few years ago.
Don't go away. Just a minute. I want you to talk just briefly about Financial Executives International.
Oh, okay.
You're the chairman.
Oh, I was last year. I'm the outgoing chairman.
Talk a little bit about what they're up to.
Yeah, so Financial Executives International, of course, is the preeminent association of CFOs and financial executives. They have 74 chapters around the country, about 13,000 members. There's a chapter in Japan and also multiple chapters in Canada. They're involved in numerous kinds of activities, some in advocacy around accounting standards and regulations. I know lease accounting is one that we were heavily involved in, as well as revenue recognition and the recent release of the RevRec standard that we have to go figure out how to implement. And so very actively involved in advocacy around accounting standards and rules. There's private company forums if you're not a public company, where the private company committees advocate for changes in tax laws or regulations that tend to favor private companies, or it's a forum to bring up issues, things like Obamacare and whatnot and the cost of Obamacare. So very active organization in expressing the points of views of the financial community. It's also a great networking organization where through the 74 chapters we get together on a monthly basis. We hear great speakers from whatever community you're in, and even bring in speakers to talk about current topics, everything from M&A and acquisitions to disclosure to operations and operational type of activities like shared services and outsourcing. So great association to be involved in if you have a chance.
Thanks,
Al.
very much.
Thanks for giving me a minute to plug FBI.
Good. Thank you very much.